We're back with Chris Lee, founder of the University of Hawaii Academy for Creative Media. Chris, can you tell us a little bit more about the networking and how you were able to help those students get established in Hollywood?
Well, you can be as helpful as you want to be, and you just have to make the time. I think that for myself, because I was sort of very specifically saying, I know that there's going to be kids from Hawaii like myself that are going to be interested in the business. I know there's going to be kids from Hawaii whose parents are going to say the same thing, like, why do you want to go into show business? And, but if they're brave enough to venture up there, then I think that they can use whatever helping hand they can get. Now, that only goes as far as their talent. If they're clearly not up to the task, then you don't have to extend yourself. But we have no shortage of talented students coming out of Hawaii, and for them to be able to pursue their dreams as I did and find whether it's jobs as writers or directors or executives like myself. I think that's really an important thing that we all have to do if we're lucky enough to get there ourselves.
Do you have a success story or maybe one person in mind that maybe you kind of helped along and they're just a huge success now?
Well, there's a few. Actually, there's a few. Actually, the new co-executive producer of Lost was my first assistant. His name is Steve Maeda. He's not actually from here, but he's a Hapa boy. Matt Okamura is an Iolani grad also. I helped him get into the Peter Stark program, which is sort of the premier MBA in film. It's at USC. He's now running Storyline Productions, which is not Storyline, Smallville Productions, which is basically the show Smallville, the writers Goff and Millar. He's running their film division over at Disney, and he's also written scripts for them and stuff. And so I'm very, very proud of Matt. He's done very, very well for himself.
Okay. Well, how did this whole Academy for Creative Media get started then? Was it a thing you wanted to do for a while, or
no? Actually,
how did that come about?
I've been in Hollywood for about 27 years, and like a lot of my peers from Hawaii who left in the 70s, many of us were coming home primarily because our parents were getting much older and had health issues and wanted to spend time in Hawaii. And it's hard to break away from, obviously, the salary structures and the life that people can accomplish on the mainland. But on the other hand, you can't compare it to the benefits of being with family and the benefits of being here in Hawaii. The challenge is to find things that are just as interesting to do with your life in some ways. And my father had sent me a newspaper clipping about the university was interested in building a film school, and I was actually approached by some faculty here at the university if I'd be interested in it. So I gave it a lot of thought, and then I said, yeah, you know what, I'm going to be home. I'm going to continue producing. I'm going to produce from Hawaii during the time I was in the middle of SWAT. But I will, let me see what I can do with this. And so I made a deal to do so, and that's how I got involved.
Was it hard to continue to produce in Hawaii while you were putting the school together? How'd you manage your time?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I think that's why we have Hawaiian Airlines, so you can just get on a plane and go back and forth. And, I was sort of used to commuting by air from various projects and things. But there's no question that I had to set aside virtually everything else. So SWAT was sort of the last project that I did in Hollywood, and then everything else just sort of came to a halt. And I really did spend 2 years working very hard trying to get this thing up and running. I mean, the first year was just about reconnaissance and learning about the system. I had taken one class at UH during the summer, and I hadn't been back on campus in a long time. But I wasn't just interested in what was happening in Manoa. I was interested in what's happening at all the campuses on all the islands. So I went to all 10 campuses. I've met with faculty, administrators, students. I met with a lot of the business community, and I met with a lot of the political leadership in the state, going door to door in the legislature and stuff, and meeting with the governor. I think that the key for me was to try to figure out what kind of film school, and it's more than a film school, but what that would mean in an era where there are about 200 film schools in this country, and there are brilliant ones, USC, UCLA, NYU, and they're huge operations, and they are the gold standard. So what is it that we in Hawaii could create that we could market on a global basis that could make a difference here in Hawaii? And so I moved very quickly away from the from just the notion of film to the notion of storytelling, and not caring very much about which medium the students use to choose to tell their stories. Because for me, it was just as important to embrace computer animation and video gaming as it was traditional film. Now,
So more on the content then, as
it's all
opposed to
about
the delivery.
content. It's all about content.
Mhm.
I mean, we don't for instance, there are some very good programs here already at the community colleges and at Pacific New Media. If you wanted to go in and learn about how to do Final Cut Pro or how to do Maya software stuff, and that's not what we really do. We're focused on the storytelling. And the storytelling for me was about providing an institution that would be dedicated, on the one hand, to being a platform for indigenous storytellers, whether it's local kind storytelling or just stories that hadn't been told before. And then on the other side, working with, in particular, animation and video gaming, because I know that there's a growing industry here in Hawaii already in this area. And I felt there's no reason why Hawaii cannot be the home of, say, Pixar, or one of the homes of Electronic Arts, or do what Singapore just did, which was to attract LucasArts to move their animation and gaming all the way to Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, to me, the creation of intellectual property is the kind of manufacturing Hawaii should be involved in, because it doesn't require the raw materials to come in from Matson, and it doesn't require the finished product to go out on Matson. Which isn't to say anything bad about Matson, it's just to say that those inherent cost structures make it impossible for us to compete with places that have the ability to bring in raw materials and ship out finished product. We also don't have the low-cost, large labor population of, say, China or Hong Kong. But what we do have is really smart kids who have some great stories to tell. And they are very, like most kids today, they're very akamai about how to work with the mediums, how to work on computers, how to program for computers. And so I was much more interested in multimedia literacy, if you will, than traditional linear learning processes. And visual storytelling is, for me, is going to be very much the way we will learn in the future, much more so than now. And beyond that, the icing on the cake was the cost structure in terms of the technology necessary to create a film school had come down so far from what it used to be. It used to be that you would have to buy a $200,000 Avid editing deck just so people could edit things together. In fact, the University of Hawaii years ago was like the first place to buy an Avid. It's still in a corner somewhere. But the notion that I came up with is what I call the digital tool belt, which was basically a laptop with the software for writing, for editing, for animation, for video games, combined with a small DV camera. Literally goes into a backpack, and then the students go out and make their movies. And just as importantly, because you give them the tools to take home with them, they're working as much as possible on their projects. The old model was that students would have to sign up for editing time and come in for their 2 hours and then get off the machine. And the reality of the creative process is the big ideas come at 4:30 in the morning. They don't come because someone's slotted you in for 2 hours at 7 a.m. or something like that. So there was I think a bit of a radical rethinking about how the education was going to be taught. There obviously was a traditional classroom time, but I referred to it as sort of 24/7 education, because it's very intensive, time intensive, making these movies. But if the students have access to the editing equipment and stuff like that, then they can spend the time doing it.
So it's almost like you've revamped the structure of learning.
Well, I don't know if I've revamped the structure of learning. I just looked at a problem which, on one hand, was a practical one. I didn't have any infrastructure. I had no building space. I had a couple classrooms. I didn't really have any equipment. But what could I buy with, say, a $100,000 gift from Roy and Hilda Takayama, who were very kind, were sort of my angel investors early on? Well, I could buy 10 or 12 laptops and 10 or 12 cameras, and I could hire an instructor, Ann Misawa, who's a brilliant filmmaker herself and is another Punahou graduate, had come back to Hawaii, and actually have somebody instructing them in making movies. And out of that course, came, I think, something like 100 short films, because they had to do like 5 movies in one semester. And they could do it because we were giving them the tools for it. And some of those films have gone on to win awards and play festivals around the world and continue to do so. And I think that the model has proven to be very successful, that what I didn't want to do was go in and say, all right, I'm not doing anything until you give me a building, which I think is maybe a little more traditional here. Because I knew I could attract the students, and I knew I could attract the faculty, and I knew both were very talented. I just needed to give them some tools. And by tools, I don't just mean the hardware. I also mean the tool of the learning experience with the instructor.